This is another episode of Paul and Katerina Inspiring Conversations. All things. We have a series, Paul.
We do. Yeah, we do. Certainly.
So good to be back together again. We already had a wonderful episode that's called Everything is Frequency. Check it out. It's on YouTube. Another episode we just recorded last week, Learning the Language of Water. And before we dive into today's topic, I wanted to read some parts of Paul's incredible professional background. You have accomplished a lot in your life, Paul. I can see that. And you're also very grounded and humble. I really appreciate that about you.
Thank you.
So Paul Edge is an innovator, scientist, eco-psychologist, influencer, public speaker, and frequency expert. Certainly, Paul has always been motivated by a desire and obsession to provide a humanitarian answer to the questions that were not being asked. However, pragmatically, even from a very young age, he was mindful of the multidiscipline learnings that would be required to implement real impact on a global level. Over 20 years ago, Paul decided to take a strictly scientific approach to the study of frequency. By 2003, Paul had begun to compile a vast bank of theoretical knowledge based on result replicability and anecdotal evidence. So you have also been a highly sought after DJ and a producer of a global renown by performing around the world. And today, your ongoing research has led you to discoveries that will potentially profoundly impact women's health. And that's the cause that you're deeply passionate about. I love that. You are also a committed disciple of Milton Erickson's work, devoting over 20,000 hours to the subject. And Paul's unique skills have positively impacted the lives of many clients across the globe. Wow, Paul's career, personal life, and study have been passionately and continuously involved in providing workable and implementable solutions for women's rights, racism, sex trafficking, sexual inequality, addiction, and environmental sustainability. In addition to his purposeful impact work, he reads voraciously. I can confirm that. Has a profound understanding of ancient spiritual belief systems and legacy. Paul, welcome to the Hi. And just to take a moment to introduce myself, my name is Katerina Satori. My work is devoted to raising consciousness on the planet. I also weave ancient wisdom traditions. And how Paul and I connected. We connected through a mutual adoration of this one female philosopher, mathematician. Her name is Hypatia. And we started talking about her because I met Paul at a leadership gathering, an exquisite leadership gathering. And he was wearing a goddess symbol. I still remember, right? You were wearing a goddess symbol. That's the one.
There you go.
Right there. Right. And that's how we quickly determined that we both have a deep embodied connection with the sacred feminine, with Divine Mother, with the goddess. And then we found our connection through Hypatia, this really beautiful, incredible philosopher with a very tragic aunt, right? And then we start sharing books. Hey, stop. My cat. And then we start sharing books together. And then the rest is we are here diving into a deeper conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Paul, today we are going to dive truly into a topic. In our intention together is to bring support to the collective. That was our mutual intention, to give a voice to something that a lot of people feel, but don't know how to name and how to move through it. And what we arrived in our last conversation, we arrived to this term collective PTSD, right? And one way to move through collective PTSD is to suppress it because it's really painful to touch it, right? So in order to move forward, it's understandable and natural instinct, right? Just say, you know what, I'm going to just kind of shovel it here and not even touch it. So I forget about it and I move forward. But what happens since you and I are, we walking the path of supporting people in human transformation, whatever you suppress, you're not going to run away from it. It will just find a way to express it.
Yeah. 2017, I developed a psychological profiling system. And one of the things that became apparent is what we call the survival cycle, is when people are in the survival cycle, everyone around them by default has to move into that to engage them.
Whoa. Let's pause. You're just immediately dropping the most powerful insight. Survival cycle, and everybody is around them immediately goes into survival cycle with them. I literally just went through it 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Wow.
It's and anyone who's in a relationship will know this. I mean, when one partner is when they're having an argument, what are you both doing? You're both engaging each other from a survival perspective. The impact on the family, however, is really quite profound. And I talk about the law of requisite variety a lot. And the law of requisite variety, in its simplest term, is the part of the system with the most variability dominates the system. So if you apply that to mental health, or you apply that to sickness, if anybody has had the unfortunate experience of dealing with a loved one who is sick, what tends to happen is the whole family gets dragged into it. That's the law of requisite variety, absolutely in effect. And the World Health Organization, I think it was a year ago, actually released a report saying 25% increase in the prevalence of anxiety and depression worldwide.
Worldwide.
And so when we're dealing with what happened from March 2020 to today, we have to go back to March 2020 and then understand the impact that that's had, including me. I mean, Code Zero was a very successful business, and yet I wasn't allowed to practice because my business requires in person, if I can't do it on Zoom, consultations and helping people. So state of California said, well, wear a mask. Well, I need to see the mouth. It's one of the most revealing aspects of any Ericksonian tactic. It's not the one, but it's the one that I use the most. So I had to shut down. So that was 7 years work gone in the space of 2 weeks. And thankfully, I know how to deal with it. But I have a skill set that I've learned over many years. The average person doesn't. And so what we are seeing right now is this, even companies are truly concerned about the rise in mental health issues, which I believe go back to lockdown. And when we don't talk about that very simple thing, because pull your bootstraps up. Well, it's kind of that's not the solution here. We are dealing with and I know from your personal experience that lockdown triggered something in you, which might be really good for you to share, in my opinion, at this point, because it's truth. And how did you experience?
Yeah, Paul, it was such emotional experience for me, because all the wounds from being raised in Soviet Union with so much unpredictability, anything I would say the frequency that I just can describe my childhood growing up in Soviet Union, anything could turn on a dime, right? Anything could change really abruptly, and this collapse. And more than that, the fear of speaking up and the fear of saying something that you deeply believe, that got triggered. So when I was going through the lockdown, it and in everything that came with it, it was so activating for me. I had to lean on all of my tools because the inner child in me got really frightened and angry. It's almost like, why do we have to go through this experience again? What did we do to deserve it? My inner child was angry, right? My inner child was really angry because a lot of things were not making sense. And the state of California did had quite an extensive lockdown, right? It was lots of layers of restrictions. And my inner child just had so many flashbacks back in Soviet Union, back into that feeling that I'm very discomfortable feeling those feelings. And it's called feeling of powerlessness. My entire life, I stand for sovereignty, right? Living in freedom and power. And going through lockdown activated those old wounds of feeling powerlessness and feeling angry and not knowing how to actually move through that. Thank goodness, again, just like you said, I had the tools, right? All this training, all these spiritual practices and self-development and meditation and yoga and breath work and nature. That's how we lean on all the tools. But it made me thinking, this was a real impact on our psyche, on a collective psyche. And so many people right now still feel the impact. It's a frozen trauma, right? It's a frozen trauma that if we don't dare to give it a voice, if we don't dare to, first of all, acknowledge it happened, it was traumatic, right? It put a lot of people out of their livelihoods, out of the sense of, I don't know what's happening in the world. And of course, there were blessings and benefits and the transformation that came with it. It always comes a duality. But in this conversation, we want to acknowledge the pain that has not been acknowledged and the difficulty of those who maybe still be grappling with what the frack really happened.
Right. Yeah, it's there was a wonderful article written once that the number one cause of death in addiction is denial, but it's not always the denial of the addict. What you're speaking to is confronting the denial.
Confronting the denial, yes.
What has happened. I am ambivalent in many respects to the entire process. However, I have a family, my mom and my dad and my sister. I've got a 16-year-old nephew who's lost 2 years of his life. Well, many nephews and nieces who've lost 2 years of their life. And so from that perspective, I think that, people made the best decisions they could under a severe amount of pressure. And not all those decisions were the correct ones. It's really that simple. We see this. Friends have gone apart based on whichever position they took. Families have fallen apart based on whichever position they took. And that's ongoing. And which means that, again, the law of requisite variety is in play, and everyone around is in their survival cycles. And this is reflected sociologically, right? Suicides are through the roof. Mental health challenges are through the roof. Addictions through the roof. That's a problem. And I think that the first step, I live by this. Forgiveness is letting go of all hope for a better past. And that's kind of the starting point, is what's happened. It's really that simple. You can't change the past.
We can't change the past.
You can move forward and stop living in the past. There's a wonderful phrase: if you're going to go through the rest of your life navigating through the rearview mirror, don't be surprised when you crash. And quite honestly, in my opinion, I say the leaders, but parents are leaders, teachers are leaders. The community has lots of leaders within it. It's not people like me or people like you. We have a role to play, obviously, and it's a very important role because we have a skill set that we can give people. But it's time for the leaders, in my opinion, to sit down and go, you know what the hell just happened?
Yes.
Really, what the hell just happened? And how do we move forward as a species? Because we've got this schism within society. And the people who are really, really suffering right now are the children, believe it or not. And I don't want to sound like an advert, but they've lost 2 years of their life. I cannot imagine if I was a 14-year-old losing my 14 to 16-year-old experiences. And I would challenge anybody who is over the age of 16 to choose a 2-year period in your life and just ask yourself, what would have happened to me if I hadn't learned those lessons?
Mm-hmm.
And then also understand, we were in lockdown for nearly, what was it, 2 years?
2 years. Yeah.
The US military regard isolation after 15 days as a war crime. Now think about that. And yet, all of us are just expected to go, oh, well, we were in isolation for a year and a half, we deal with it. Well, no, we don't deal with it. You don't just move on from that. And so in my opinion, and this is something I talk about, we have to recognize that people have been through a traumatic event, a highly traumatic event. Life as you knew it changed, and you had no control over that change.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do we get out of that? Because most people are still in that state.
Mm-hmm.
You get out of it by admitting to it. Like,
yes, that's the first step to revelation.
Yeah, not pretending, oh, well, you know, we were all locked down, it was great. No, it wasn't great, it sucked. We couldn't go to the beach in Encinitas for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't great, it sucked. And until people, it's almost like everyone's afraid to go back to that moment in case it happens again. If you don't go back to that moment, it will happen. That is the nature of patterns. They don't just give up. They carry on running and running and running and running. And I've spent many years developing processes that can identify these patterns, but they keep running. You know, what was it? Epigenetics is generational patterns.
Yeah.
So the responsibility is on us. It's not on the children, it's on us. And we have to figure a way out because right now everybody's stuck. People are moving forward, pretending nothing happened. No, that means you're stuck. You can't be stuck anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. So the first step is to admit and to acknowledge, right? That's the first step, to admit and to acknowledge and to feel, right? To feel that impact, allow yourself to feel those emotions.
Right, absolutely. And you know, if you have children, explain to them, you did the best you could.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what my brothers and sisters who are parents did. They did the best they could in situations that nothing had ever prepared them for.
Mm-hmm.
But what we don't want, in my opinion, is a generation or multiple generations of people coming through into society angry and pissed off because they feel they were betrayed by the very people they expect to protect them.
Right. Mm-hmm. That is very familiar to me. I'm growing up in Soviet Union. You know, that is very familiar to me. At least, you know, when I was growing up in Soviet Union, it was embedded in my consciousness that you got to take all the recommendations from the higher authorities with a huge grain of salt,
Mm.
and trust your animal instinct, right?
Right.
Otherwise you would never survive. You would never survive. So there was this inherent distrust in the, in the authorities that I grew up with. So when I came to US, it sort of got rebalanced because I really saw a different model
Right.
of
Right.
relating to authorities here. I was like, wow, you actually respect your authorities here? Wow, in Russia we don't at all, right? So it's I feel like it's, this is such an interesting process, because you are being pushed in a way by the experience to question a lot of things. And I love giving this a voice, because our intention here is to assist those who maybe were still afraid to even touch that place of vulnerability, because it was deeply vulnerable to go through that experience that we did in the year 2020, right? The vulnerability of our human existence was real.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's no shame in admitting them.
Yeah, it's actually a sense of power. Mhm.
Yeah, and understanding that the first fear that we learn as human beings is the fear of strangers or the fear of abandonment. In all of the clients that I work with, abandonment is always the primary pattern, and abandonment splits into guilt and shame.
Mhm.
Guilt and shame splits into, gosh, thousands of different iterations.
Yeah.
And so, I think the first question that most people, in my opinion, should be asking, do they feel guilty or do they feel ashamed?
Mm.
Guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because that experience did trigger the collective abandonment wound,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. If without wishing to be conspiratorial in any way, if there was an intention to trigger that wound, that was the best way to do it. It really was. And so, it always comes back to guilt or shame. It really does. You can cut through all the layers, and you will come back to guilt or shame eventually. And so, what we don't want is to teach the emerging generations that guilt or shame is acceptable, because it's not. It's actually the most disempowering thing a human can accept as being their reality. And so, it's such an important step, because all manipulation occurs through guilt or shame. It
Mm.
really is that simple. The sales process relies on actual shame, believe it or not. It shouldn't do, but it does. Unethical sales I'm talking about. There's something wrong with you if you don't buy this. There's something wrong with you if you don't have this, and so on and so on and so on. And so this is a very, very pivotal moment for us as a species and as a society, because if we don't get to grips and stop being in denial, that's the whole point. We come back to denial. I've worked with a few people who had substance challenges, and the hardest thing to do was to get them to get past the denial. And it's not the denial of doing the drugs. That was never the problem. The challenge was what's behind that? What's behind that expression? And it was always guilt or shame. Always.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that applies to everybody, because I'm not an addiction counselor. I'm just saying that applies to the people I work with. And so I do feel that focusing in on guilt and shame. In fact, do you remember that event I did? You were part of when we all moved outside and everybody started. What was the common theme of that? It was guilt.
Mhm.
And that was 12 people, and it all just came up simultaneously.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, if anybody's listening to this, perhaps the first thing that they can do is say, hey, do I feel guilty? Or do I feel ashamed? Do I feel guilty for depriving my children? See, because what happens then is we justify. Oh, well, you put up with losing 2 years of your adolescence because it was lockdown. And then there's a lot of parents out there who moved heaven and earth to make sure that their children did not go through that. However, the reality is those kids were not allowed in school, and when they were in school, they had to wear face masks. This is really serious stuff for the long-term development of the child. And you know, I'm not talking as a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I'm talking as someone who observes. And so, in order to get the kids over the hump, the parents must first forgive themselves, and that's where forgiveness is letting go of all hope for a better path, because there wasn't really anything anybody could do.
Right.
It was kind of this mass insanity that gripped the world, and everybody just went, okay, we're doing it. And then half the country went, no, we're not doing it. Well, now, great. Now we've got two halves of the country shouting at each other. Fantastic. That's not a healthy, productive society either. So we have to move, in my opinion, the next step is for both sides to go, oh, well, maybe we weren't quite as cool as we thought we were. Because both sides, you know, fight, flight, or freeze. I've asked all my friends, which one were you in during lockdown? Fight, flight, freeze. Fight turns out to be the Republican MAGA crowd, or whatever crowd they are. The flight tends to be left of center. The freeze are people like me who just sat in the middle going, there's nothing I can do, I'm going to go to the beach. But once you can determine that, which one of those three groups were you in, now you're actually closer to taking the step out. Then, you know, if you're in the fight camp, you're probably still fighting. If you're in the flight camp, you're probably still flighting, or whatever flighting is, or even else. If you're in the freeze camp, you're having chats with Katerina on Facebook. So you know, these little steps. Then the trouble with this overwhelm is that it's literally overwhelmed. People are overwhelmed. But when you break it down to little simple steps like that, and what you do after that, we can get onto. But if you are in one of those three camps, recognize your position. Okay, yeah, I did that.
Yeah.
That's the first step. That you trust God, that you're exactly where you are meant to be. So you keep coming back to the prayer we talked about last time.
Yes. Yes. And that prayer is so divine, absolutely divine. I really resonate with what you shared about the three camps. I am definitely the one who who runs, right? I remember it was so hard for me to be in a lockdown in terms of, you know, I'm such a freedom driven person. I remember in June I went to Austin, so I started traveling pretty quickly, right? Well, I also made peace with the situation. You know, my clarity in the moment was I invoked Divine Mother, and I said, Divine Mother, what's happening is happening. If I get to receive this this bug, and if it's going to serve my evolution, I am going to accept and move through it. And if it's not going to serve my evolution, it's not going to be in resonance with my consciousness. So what I'm going to do, I am going to move forward. And I remember I went to Austin. I went into like deep countryside with very few people in staying in this kind of a pyramid structure. It was really powerful. But I was, you know, like that's my mechanism. When the pressure is high, I tend to shift the locations. I tend to go somewhere, right? It's like I don't freeze. I go. I move, right? And I was actually in a very dynamic service to the collective all year. So I run into service, right? I'm like, okay, everyone, this is my moment of empowering the collective. But it's a mechanism, right? It's like it's totally a mechanism that I acknowledge and see and feel now, that sometimes my mechanism is I will focus on others in order not to feel my own process, right? And that's something I'm really becoming aware. I feel like, Paul, it's so fascinating. I feel like I am being shown by my higher self how to really feel my feelings, like on a whole new level, right? Like it is so profound, you know. Sometimes I don't want to feel intense feelings like worry. And I'm such an empathic person. When you were sharing about the survival cycle, and when somebody in your life is going through a challenging time, you're gonna go on a ride with them. This is exactly what happened for me for my evolution 2 weeks ago. A good friend of mine went through a real crisis, and every part of me got so empathic, and I went on a whole emotional ride, right? It's really threw me. I was watching myself being thrown off balance, and really taking on that energy. But it was a beautiful medicine for me to really see it, to really see the mechanism in motion. Because after I leaned on my tools, reached out for support, named what I was going through, right? Not just soldiering on and suppressing, but really, oh my gosh, this is freaking vulnerable. I am going through these waves. And I feel like I am being shown how to embrace the turbulent feeling as a child and hold it and allow it to be. And then it moves like the wind, right? If you don't push it, if you don't try to fix it, it begins to dissipate it through acknowledgement. I know for some people who are listening to this, and maybe for you, Paul, this may sound like one-on-one of emotional mastery, right? But I feel there is so many layers to that, and it's really easy to spiritually bypass these experiences, right? It's quite easy.
Yeah. But here's the thing we discovered as we started to implement the pattern analysis. So I'm always looking for what triggers the survival cycle, because it's a 4-step loop. There's a thrive cycle, which is 4-step loop. It's a complicated matrix. One of the things that kept coming up was coping strategies. And what, believe it or not, most adults do, and I changed mine immediately, I can assure you, is we rely on the coping strategies that we developed as children and refined as adults. But the base is still what we learned as children. But here's the thing. The cope was in response to an unmet need. Therefore, when you rely on the coping strategy that was established as a child to an unmet need, you're not actually doing yourself any good. You're actually re-triggering the survival cycle.
You're re-triggering the survival cycle.
Yeah, because it's attached to an unmet need.
Yes.
So many people, that's what we do as humans. We learn behaviors, I say up to the age of 7, and then we refine them and we dress them up and we call them something else. But ultimately, we're still little kids doing the best we can in the world. What is very difficult for people to understand is that those coping strategies, which I guarantee you everybody on the planet resorted to, were developed in response to an unmet need.
And what are the core human needs from your experience, Paul?
Oh, well, it's a complex process. We have around about, it starts with 2 very simple questions, believe it or not. And there are about 180 responses that are compiled to those 2 questions. I think from my perspective, I'm talk from a personal perspective, my overwhelming need is to feel safe.
To feel safe?
Yeah.
To feel safe.
And I think, it's so ironic, just prior to lockdown, I was about to launch a thing called the safety protocol. Because that was coming through in the collective, and especially as I deal predominantly with female clients, there I was observing this ongoing narrative of challenging aspects of their life, reinforcing the fact that they weren't safe. And I got very angry at men for allowing that to happen, quite frankly. But it became this really, really powerful driving force. Literally, I would say in 90% of, I worked with over a year, 2-year period, I did 60 clients. I burned myself out, of which 80% were female. And I would say of that 80%, that lack of safety came up probably 90% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it's very relevant to me as well. And so, you know, I would say, I don't know about other people, but the one thing that I do know, speaking to my family, speaking to my friends, is COVID the lockdowns made everybody feel unsafe.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And if we don't acknowledge and don't learn from that, right? This is an opportunity. You know, what I also see, Paul, it's so interesting because I also see the upside of the experience of, you know, the psychedelic movement is taking a really big strides right now in the last 3 years. You
have to be careful with what you say there. If the psychedelic movement is taking strides as a result of a coping strategy, it's actually taking strides to perpetuate the survival of some.
Yeah. I didn't mean to the coping strategies, but no, it's like as a result of the last 3 years, you know, there were some openings and the breakthroughs in the collective we see. And for example, what I wanted to share is maybe it's only in my community, but I see conversations about nervous system regulation. You know, it's almost becoming a common sense conversation of how important it is to regulate the nervous system and breath work. And,
Absolutely.
right. So that's
you know, the one thing that mortality has a wonderful way of making people realize how unhealthy they are. You know, if that is what emerges, if people can be healthy in mind as well as body, see, that's the point. Right now, there is a movement away from unhealthy lifestyles, which is fantastic. However, if that's if that's sort of the other half of the scale is, well, we want to be healthy so this doesn't happen again, but we still haven't dealt with the mental side of it, it's all going to crash and burn at some point in the future. Mm-hmm. And the irony of the split in society was it did, for a lot of people, and I don't think this is recognized, and I will include myself in this, a lot of people chose not to go a specific route because they had informed themselves of the body's ability to heal. That was shouted down during the time. However, in my case, that was actually my firm, resolute belief. And a lot of my friends and scientists and doctors were also of the same opinion that if they took the correct preventative measures, i.e., cutting the crap out of their diet, eating, drinking more water, exercising more, they could boost their immune system, which meant that they were on a separate path. That, in my opinion, this is where all these conflicts still survive, because it's like some people are like, well, I did that, you're all wrong. And the other people are like, well, we did this, you're all wrong. And I'm like, well, you're both still alive, so maybe you're both correct. How do we find some common ground here and move forward? Yes. It's that I really, feel we as a community, we have to find that common ground.
We have to come the common ground. And that begins with us acknowledging and validating and naming and coming out of the denial. So Paul, from your experience and your wisdom and your knowledge, what are the practical ways for people to start coming out of the survival cycle and moving towards a thriving cycle. You said there's 4 steps in each cycle.
There's 4 loops, and the loops come from epigenetic, what you learn from your parents, basically, and the decisions you make. I keep coming back to the quote that I use literally every time I speak: forgiveness is letting go of all hope for the better.
Can you say it again? You were disappearing.
Yeah, sorry. Forgiveness is letting go of all hope for a better past.
Yes. Oh, so powerful. Forgiveness is letting go of all hope for the better past.
For a better past. Yeah, and that's an Erickson quote. It's being hijacked and jumped on, but the original quote is by Milton Erickson. And you know, I think that could be a platform where people go, okay, today is the start of you know, the past is irrelevant. The future is actually irrelevant as well, unless you're a libertarian or compatibilist or whatever. We've only got the now.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if you want to carry on carrying all that baggage, it's going to weigh you down eventually. And it's okay to put it down and walk away. And I think that's the choice, is do you want to keep the COVID baggage on your back? It doesn't matter what decisions you make. Do you want to keep carrying that? It's kind of, it's okay to just put it down and walk away.
Yeah.
There's no law that says you have to carry the baggage for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And how we do one thing, Casey Neal always used to say this: how we do one thing is how we do everything. Yeah, you know, it's time for us to just not move on, because there's a lot of talking and a lot of what's the word, understanding to be learned. There's a lot of learnings, there you go, that have not been accepted yet. Erickson used to say, all trauma is unfinished learning.
All trauma is unfinished learning. That's really powerful.
He was
So,
halfway learned.
yeah, that's powerful. What would be the steps that you recommend for people to start aligning to thriving as a from this present now, from this powerful now, making peace with the past and aligning to thriving?
Well, making peace with the past is the first step. But before you can make peace with the past, you must start to make peace with yourself.
Making peace with yourself. And when you say making peace with yourself, even, well, making peace with your coping strategies, right? Like acknowledging them.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who is here, and I'm not talking about the people who sadly crossed and got sick and everything else. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about people here today. They're here because they made decisions. Those decisions were the correct decisions. That's why you're here. So stop beating yourself up. There is nothing wrong with you. That knocks shame out of the way. And you didn't do anything wrong because you're here today. So now that takes guilt out of the picture. Now, it might be easier said than done. I understand that. However, you know, if you want to spend millions of dollars on therapy, go for it. The reality is, these patterns have been with you your entire life. And so the fact that they have called themselves, was it Shakespeare said, all the world's stage, and a man has many, all the world's stage and man, all the world's a stage, and each player plays their part, and a man has many roles. That's the pattern. The pattern shows up, I guarantee it. I'm not going to here, but I can go through my entire life and go, oh, that's that pattern. It's got a different face. It's got a different language, but it's the same bloody pattern, just disguising itself and showing up again. And the way you shut down the patterns, well, there's 2 ways. You can say, I love you, thank you. That's the whole Ho'oponopono strategy, which does work, by the way. But you have to say it a lot, non-stop. Or you can just go, you know what? I recognize you. I see you.
It's so fascinating to me how our psyche works. When we acknowledge and recognize, right? And the frightened parts of our personality. The healing is instantaneous,
Yeah, because they
right?
just, the patterns don't want, you see, this is the big misconception. Uh, Patterns don't actually want to hurt you. They're
Mhm.
lines of code, they just want to go home.
Mm.
As they teach it, or Mona Simeone used to teach, they want to go home and be transmuted so they can come back as pure light.
Oh, I love that. That feels so resonant for my soul. Yeah, well, it's so interesting, Paul, because in my healing work, I often do this soul fragmentation process with people, different types of wounds from parallel incarnations as well. And it's exactly the same when we acknowledge the wound that releases the light, that releases the soul strength and power. I love hearing that we have the similarities in our processes. I love that.
We get angry at the patterns.
Yes. So don't get angry on at your patterns.
There's a wonderful story told in, which one it was, from Frogs and Princesses. And it was Banda and Grinda were doing a session with a woman who was afraid to go over bridges. And this was problematic because she worked in Manhattan and would spend 4 hours every morning driving around trying to find a way into Manhattan, and she was a top executive, so she didn't have to go over a bridge. And so they said, well, talk to the pattern. And do you know where the pattern came from?
Where?
When she was 5, someone read her a story about a troll under the bridge.
Oh, wow.
So she created a pattern to protect herself from trolls under the bridge.
Mm.
And I have hundreds of stories like that. So understand, just because it's creating havoc in your life right now does not mean it didn't once serve a purpose. And if it did serve a purpose, they forget. It's like, oh, there's another story. You went in and the person, they said, well, speak to your pattern. And the woman came out laughing. And they said, what are you laughing at? Well, I asked him the question and he said, I don't know.
Yeah.
Forgotten what his purpose is.
Mm-hmm.
So if these patterns are created by the child to protect themselves, they're still protecting you. They may not be doing it in a way that is productive today, because the needs of a child is completely different to the needs of an adult for the family. Mm-hmm. But that's the patterns, and so I do feel, we can talk around psychological techniques and everything else, but I do feel that we come back to that instantaneous quote. Well, there's 2 quotes from Erickson that apply. The first one obviously is forgiveness is letting go of hope for a better past. There's another quote when they asked him about his form of therapy, and he said, every individual is as unique as their fingerprint, and there is not one size fits all solution.
Yeah, exactly. It's so
well, sorry.
Yes, I so agree with you and resonate with that quote. Every individual is so unique. Mm-hmm.
So what might work for someone else may not work for you, and that's okay. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Again, so we keep going back, guilt, shame, guilt, shame, guilt, shame, guilt, shame. Mm-hmm. It drives our society, literally drives our society.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, an hour went by like 5 minutes. It's just like, what happened? But I love all this illumination that you brought around patterns, around the abandonment wound, guilt and shame, coping strategies. And it's about the power of acknowledging and seeing the pattern, the wound, the pain, right? And how the denial is actually what holds us back into the illusion. And if the moment we make peace with the past, knowing this was the perfect past, right? We can fully arrive to the now and start feeling again, and start feeling enthusiasm for life and a sense of connection. Always today, after our interview, after I go to the beach, my intention was to write down 100 reasons to celebrate life right now, because tomorrow is a summer solstice and it's a day of light and celebration. And I was like, I just received this idea. I was like, you know what? I'm going to sit down. I'm going to do that. I'm going to really focus my mind on all the richness and magnificence of this present moment. And so I feel really inspired by our conversation. I feel it's so uplifting and so practical. Any other final words that could support our community?
I think one of the things that's unfolding, we were speaking about this in water research, is water will reject lies every single time.
Water will reject lies. Mhm.
And so your water.
Mhm.
So if you lie to yourself or make it, then water, it will be rejected by yourself.
Mhm.
And so, you know, when we talk about really sitting down and going, and that's why I propose, are you fight, flight, freeze? Because that's a starting point. I think everybody can look back over the last 2 years and go, hey, I was actually that, or I was that, or I was that, in my case, freeze. Then now you're engaging yourself from a place of honesty.
Mhm.
Once you have that foundation for the conversation, it's actually going to be a lot easier to move through into, well, if I was freeze, did I do something wrong? No, I didn't actually. Okay, that means there's nothing wrong with me. Okay, cool. Now I've got no guilt, no shame. I know I accept exactly how I got through COVID. And I then took the 2-year opportunity. I don't have children, I don't have family here. So I took the 2-year opportunity and used it the best way I could. And now people are starting to benefit from that. So what did you do through that 2 years that you can categorically now refute there's something wrong with me, that produced the positive effects? What was that?
Mhm.
Because if you can get to that space, now you're moving out of guilt and away from shame.
Mhm.
But it starts with that very simple process. Forgiveness is letting go of all hope for a better past. Draw the line. Sit down with yourself. Sit down with your kid. Say, hey, how did we behave during lockdown? Did we isolate people? Did we run away from people? That's what isolation is running away from people. Did we push them away? And that goes for both sides, by the way. I'm not blaming any side here.
Mhm.
Okay, if we did, what's the opposite of that? How do we restore balance?
Yes.
Because if you're, if you're on that side of the plank and there's nothing on that side, you're going to fall into the water.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So where's the balance? What did a person do that could be seen as out of balance?
Mhm.
Did you attack your friends on Facebook for having a different opinion? Did you isolate friends that you've known for your entire life because they shared a different opinion to you? And again, this isn't one side or another. This is everybody.
Right.
Literally everybody. And if the answer to those questions is yes, I did, move forward from there.
Yeah.
Start taking steps to bring the balance back into your life.
I love this. This is such a practical, objective perspective. And again, really removing those hooks of shame and guilt. And
Which is basically, they're activated by blame.
yes, by blame, exactly.
So if you're still blaming people for their behavior in COVID, you are now the instigator of guilt and shame.
Yeah.
So if you want to be that person, go for it. I can't change you. I can't make you make a different choice. Nobody can. That's your choice to make. But if you realize, oh, hang on a second here. Yeah, I did blame them actually. Guess what? now you move into, oh, okay, that was a bit silly. I was in the state, I was in flight mode, or I was in freeze mode, or I was in fight mode. If I was in fight mode, I'm going to blame everybody. If I'm in flight mode, I'm going to blame them for making me run away. Okay, great. Woo, we've all established now that we were all part of the blame.
That's right. All part of the blame game. That's right.
And our responsibility is, by being part of that blame game, we have activated mass guilt and shame.
Yes, yes, exactly. Oh, wow. Wow. It makes so much sense when you named it like this. Yeah.
I have my uses.
Wow. So a mass healing opportunity. This is what
Yeah, it is. And you know, I think that it starts with the conversations like this amongst friends, amongst, you know, it's human beings experience so many letdowns during their life. It's the nature of being a human being. And if we stayed in that space, we'd never move forward. We wouldn't change our lives. And that's what I said, you know, I don't care whether you were a flight, a fight, or a freeze. If you engage in the blame game, you are part of the guilt and shame response.
Gotcha. Wow. Powerful.
So how do you stop that? You activate forgiveness is letting go of all hope for a better past. So it doesn't matter. And you do your best to heal your communities, heal your families, heal your friends.
Oh, we have so many opportunities to be useful to life right now. That's what I keep arriving. You know, I feel like it is summer, right? And I feel absolutely on fire with it. I just see so many opportunities to be of service to life, you know, to give voice to these topics, to empower people with ways to heal and to connect to their inner self and to unhook themselves from this mass guilt and shame and blame.
Yep. Yeah. And you know, it's again, it's addiction. We're addicted to a narrative. It doesn't matter. We're addicted to the flight narrative. We're addicted to, it's all addiction. We're addicted to the fight narrative. And there's nothing wrong with that. And perhaps, and this is what I hope, is we've had a problem now sociologically with opioids. It's a massive problem. And the problem, in my opinion, is not being resolved because of the blame game, the guilt and shame game. And perhaps COVID has given us an opportunity where we accept we were part of that equation. And how we do one thing is how we do everything. We learn this from the Buddhists, the monks, sorry. How we do one thing is how we do everything. So maybe COVID has given us a really good opportunity to look at our own behavior. And this is me talking from my own perspective as well as from a mass perspective, and go, okay, I got to step up and own it. I really have to step up and own this. And the more people who start stepping up and owning it, the quicker we will heal sociologically.
Wow, I love that so much. Oh, thank you, Paul. Yeah, that authenticity, that objectivity, that realness, right? What a mirror. Yeah, the COVID experience was a very powerful mirror of unconscious patterns and coping mechanism, and how quickly the blame can become a mass psychosis, you know, and the separating divide. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity to name things that it's time to name. And thank you for providing such practical steps for people to move forward. Maybe we can conclude with that prayer that I love so much. Paul introduced me, so dear community, Paul introduced me to this beautiful prayer that you call it's like a code of reality, right? That we can attune ourselves to this blueprint of living in alignment with the cosmos, with the harmony with the cosmos, alignment with your divinity. So I would love to hear, Paul, that prayer.
Do you want me to say it?
Yeah. Do you know it by heart, or do you want me to pull out the notes?
Oh, I know it by heart.
Yeah.
May today there be peace within. May you trust Source that you're exactly where you are meant to be. May you not forget the infinite possibilities that are born of faith. May you take those gifts that you have received and pass on the love that has been given to you. May you be content knowing you are a child of Source. Let this presence settle into your bones and allow your soul the freedom to sing dance, praise, and love that is there for each and every.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. What a beautiful prayer. I'll put it inside the comments so people can read it and start connecting to that divine wisdom in that one prayer. Paul, thank you so much. I will say until our next time, because it's becoming Paul and Katerina show.
Okay.
Yes, and thank you so much. I will put your website for Pleroma underneath the show notes, because you are truly
Probably code 0 would be more applicable.
Code 0? Okay, code 0 will be better. Okay, I'll put that underneath the show notes. So for those people who would like to connect with Paul, you will have access to how to find this divine soul. And thank you so much for the wisdom and inspiration and a very grounding support for our community. We can heal together. We can learn to create together again and to understand each other from the place of true compassion.
Absolutely.
On this note, until next time.
Thank you.